The day I found out my house had been pre-sold without my knowledge, my own name was spelled wrong on the contract. Under seller, it said Marjorie Cole instead of Margaret. They didn't even respect me enough to forge my name correctly. 10 minutes later, I was listening at my own hallway vent while my daughter calmly explained to someone on the phone, "Once she's in memory care, she won't fight anything. The house is as good as ours." Before I tell you how I turned that plan inside out and made every single person involved answer to the law, I want to know something from you. From which city and country are you watching this right now? Tell me in the comments. I love seeing where people are listening from, and you might be surprised how many of us are dealing with the same kind of betrayal. If stories about justice, revenge, and standing up to people who abuse your trust speak to you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tap the notification bell. Your support really does help more people hear these warnings and these victories. Now let me take you back to the moment I first realized my own child was building a case to erase me. My name is Margaret Cole, but most people in town call me Maggie. I'm 70 years old, a retired high school principal, and I have lived in the same blue craftsman house on the edge of Puget Sound for almost 45 years. If you stand on my back deck in Silver Harbor, Washington, you can watch the ferries cut across the gray water like slow-moving ghosts. It's the kind of house people ooh and ah over during holiday home tours. It's also the house my daughter and her husband tried to steal from me while I was still alive. The first moment I knew something was truly off was so small that someone else might have missed it. I was carrying a mug of tea into the dining room, moving slowly because my knees don't love damp weather anymore, when I saw a stranger sitting in my chair at the head of the table. He wore a slate suit that didn't belong in my house, with a shiny briefcase open, papers fanned out like playing cards. Across from him sat my daughter, Lily, her blonde hair twisted into a professional knot, pen in hand. Her husband, Brandon, had his elbows on the table, leaning in like he owned the place. For exactly 3 seconds, nobody noticed me. I saw my name in neat black letters at the top of a page. Then Lily looked up, saw me in the doorway, and every muscle in her face adjusted at once. "Mom, you're up from your nap early," she chirped, her voice a full octave higher than usual. I hadn't been napping. I had been in the backyard deadheading roses, but I said nothing. I set my tea down, my eyes drifting back to the page I'd glimpsed. "Who's this?" I asked. The man stood halfway, a nervous smile on his face. "Just helping with some financial planning," he said. "I'm Ethan, a planner. Not a last name, not a company, just a planner." Brandon jumped in. "Yeah, Ma, we're just making sure everything's in order. You know, in case anything ever happens. Responsible adult stuff." He flashed the same smile he used when he was trying to talk his way out of traffic tickets. I'd been a principal for 30 years. I knew that tone. It was the tone kids used when they said, "We definitely did not break that window," while glass still glittered at their feet. My eyes moved to the table. The top document had been flipped over. The next one down now faced up. Something about beneficiary designations. The one with my name had disappeared. I said. "Well, don't let me disturb your responsible planning." I picked up my mug and walked back toward the kitchen, heart beating harder than it should from a simple trip down the hall. By the time I reached the sink, my hands were shaking so badly the spoon rattled against the ceramic. I set the mug down and braced myself against the counter. 2 months earlier, I'd invited Lily and Brandon to move into the guest rooms for a while. Brandon's startup had folded. They were behind on rent. I thought I was helping them. The house was too big for just me, and if I'm honest, I was a little lonely. Now a stranger had been sitting in my chair with my name on his paperwork, and my grown daughter had introduced me to him like I was an elderly neighbor wandering through the wrong doorway. That night, after they went to bed, I walked back to the dining room and ran my fingers over the wood of my chair. It felt suddenly foreign, like it belonged to someone else. Somewhere deep in my chest, an old instinct stirred, the one I used to use on lying teenagers and smooth-talking parents. "Something is wrong," it whispered, "and it has your name on it." To understand why I didn't blow up right then and there, you need to know who I was before I became the elderly woman in my own home. For 30 years, I ran North Point High like a ship in rough water. If you ask anyone in Silver Harbor over the age of 30, they'll tell you about Principal Cole, the woman who knew every kid's name, who could stop a hallway fight with one raised eyebrow, and who always had a jar of mints for the ones who came to her office crying. I outlasted 3 superintendents, 4 school boards, and 1 ugly budget crisis. I balanced numbers and egos and teenage hormones. I sat with kids whose parents had overdosed. I met with parents who screamed in my face and then thanked me 5 years later when their child got into college. I was not used to being treated like fragile glass. My husband, Tom, died 12 years earlier from a quiet, mean cancer that took him in under a year. We had 1 child, our miracle after miscarriages baby, our Lily. She was clever, stubborn, and knew how to melt her father with a smile. She grew up listening to our dinner table stories about students and staff and doing the right thing even when it's hard. Or at least I thought she did. When Tom died, I inherited the house we'd bought together when we were 28 and broke. Over the years, we'd refinanced, fixed things, and paid it down. By the time I retired, it was long since paid off. Between my pension, modest savings, and no mortgage, I was far from rich, but I was comfortable. I baked cookies for the church bake sale, volunteered as a reading buddy at the elementary school, and took a ferry into Seattle once a month to see a play. Lily went the other direction. She moved to Portland, majored in marketing, and married Brandon, a charming man with endless ideas and 0 patience. Entrepreneurial, he called it. I called it job hopping with extra steps, but I tried to bite my tongue. They lived in trendy apartments and posted pictures from rooftop bars. Our visits were mostly holidays, smiles over turkey, and a stack of Christmas gifts they could not afford. When Brandon's latest company imploded, they came up for the weekend. Lily stirred sugar into her coffee at my kitchen island and said as casually as she could manage, "Mom, rent in Portland is brutal right now. Just for a bit, could we stay here? Maybe for 6 months? We'll help with groceries and stuff. You shouldn't be alone anyway." The part of me that missed her so badly it hurt said yes before the part that remembered every "just for a bit" story from my guidance counselor days could speak up. At first, it was nice. Brandon made a big show of fixing little things, tightening a loose cabinet knob, changing a porch light. Lily helped me sort closets to make more space. We ate dinner together most nights. I listened to them whisper in the living room about job applications and interviews. I told myself I was happy to be useful. But slowly, the edges started to move. It began with my mail. "I'll grab it, Mom," Lily said one rainy afternoon, slipping out the front door before I could put my shoes on. After that, the mail just appeared in a neat stack on my end of the dining table, minus the junk. When I joked, "Guess the catalog stopped loving me," she laughed too quickly and said, "Oh, they probably updated something. I've been tossing some of the duplicates. You don't need all that clutter. Then it was my calendar. Mom, you double-booked yourself, she said, frowning down at my paper planner. Dr. Harmon at 11 and book club at noon? That's a lot. I can handle a busy day, I replied. But why strain yourself? I called and moved your doctor's appointment to next week. It's fine. You probably wrote it down wrong anyway, right? She smiled like she'd done me a favor. I hadn't written it down wrong. I never had. 30 years of bell schedules had trained my brain to live by dates and times. But I let it go. Arguing over an appointment felt silly. The next month, she insisted we should simplify my finances. Just to protect you, she said. Scams are crazy these days. We can set up online access together, I suggested. You don't have to worry. Brandon chimed in. You shouldn't be dealing with all those screens, Ma. It's confusing. We'll just add me as a helper on some accounts. Just in case something happens. You know, like if you fall. I didn't like that. I didn't like the way they said, we'll just, like it was already decided. But I saw the concern in Lily's eyes, and I remembered my neighbor Joyce, who had fallen and broken her hip and was stuck in rehab for months. Fine, I said, but I still sign off on anything big. Of course, Lily said. The night I saw the planner in my chair came about 3 months after they'd moved in. By then, little comments had begun to pepper our conversations. Lily would pat my arm and say, You're so cute when you get mixed up, Mom, when I mislaid my reading glasses. Brandon would joke, Are you sure you remember where the, grocery store is? If I forgot to buy his favorite cereal. Your mom repeats stories a lot, doesn't she? I overheard him say to Lily once when he thought I was out of earshot. We should probably keep an eye on that. I know, she whispered back. That's why we need everything in order before it gets worse. Repeat stories? I'd always told stories. That was part of being a teacher, a mother, a person who's lived a long time. But the way they said it made my skin crawl. So when I saw the man in the slate suit, when I saw my name on that paper, it wasn't an isolated moment. It was the first time all the little helpful gestures snapped into a pattern. By the time I went to bed that night, I had pulled my old metal lockbox from the back of my closet and checked every important document. The deed still had my name. My will still matched what I remembered. My bank statements, though, were missing the most recent month. Maybe I misfiled it, I told myself. But another voice, the one that had caught plagiarized essays and cheaters for years, whispered back. Or maybe someone else filed it where you won't see it. And that was the thought that kept me staring at the ceiling until the sky started to lighten over the sound. 2 weeks later, the first real crack in their nice, tidy story appeared. It was a Tuesday, the kind of drizzly Pacific Northwest day where the clouds sit low enough to touch. I was sitting at the breakfast nook with my crossword, the house quiet, when the doorbell rang 3 sharp times. I'll get it, Lily called, footsteps quick down the hallway. Old habits made me listen. A principal never really stops doing that, mentally cataloging voices and footsteps. The voice that answered her was unfamiliar. Female, brisk, slightly nasal. Hi, I'm Natalie with Harborview Health. I'm here for Mrs. Cole's cognitive assessment. I frowned, pen hovering over the crossword. Cognitive what? Oh, great, Lily said. Come in. She's having one of her slow mornings, but we'll get her ready. Each word was a small slap. Slow morning, as if I were a laptop that refused to boot. I set my pen down and stood up slowly, letting my knees uncrumple. By the time I reached the hallway, Lily was at my door, face wide and bright like she was introducing me to a new friend. "Mom, surprise? Remember how Dr. Harmon mentioned a little memory screening? They had a cancellation, so I grabbed it." Dr. Harmon had mentioned nothing of the sort. He'd said, "You're healthier than most of my 50-year-old patients," the last time I'd seen him. A woman in a navy polo with Harbor View Health embroidered on the chest stepped into view, clipboard in hand. "Hi, Mrs. Cole. We're just going to do a quick assessment. It's very normal at your age." Normal or not, doing it without my knowledge was not. "I didn't agree to this," I said. Lily's smile went tight. "Mom, we talked about checking your memory." "No," I said calmly. "You talked about it to yourself." The assessor shifted awkwardly. "We can always reschedule if today isn't good." "She's just a bit anxious," Lily cut in. "She's been forgetting things a lot more lately, and it scares her. Right, Mom?" I looked at my daughter very carefully then. Her eyes were round, her mouth slightly turned down, the picture of concerned family. If I hadn't known her since the day she came into this world with a tuft of dark hair and an angry wail, I might have believed her. Instead, I saw the flicker, the tiny glance toward the clipboard, the quick calculation in her posture. I did the thing I should have done more of the last few months. I trusted my instincts over her performance. "Fine," I said, forcing my shoulders to relax. "If it's so normal, we can do it. But I want a copy of whatever you write down." Natalie blinked, then nodded. "Of course." We sat at the dining table. She asked me to remember 3 words, draw a clock, and do some simple subtraction. As she watched my shaky hands, Lily hovered in the doorway, making small, concerned sounds whenever I hesitated. "I'm not used to writing with an audience," I said dryly as I drew the clock face. Natalie almost smiled. "When she asked me who the current president was, I answered. Then I added, and the one before that, and the one before that. Do you want the years, too?" She checked a box on her form, faint color in her cheeks. By the time she finished, it was clear to anyone with eyes that I was not slipping away. Maybe I mixed up a digit in the serial subtraction. I've always hated math, but my mind was sharp. She packed up and said, "Honestly, Mrs. Cole, you're doing very well." In the entryway, I heard her lower her voice to Lily. "She's fine, maybe a little slower on processing, but that's normal aging. No signs of dementia, I'll note that." They thought I couldn't hear. They forgot old houses carry sound through vents like gossip. "So there's no way she could have signed something and not remembered?" Lily asked, trying to sound casual. "If she did, it would be more likely due to stress than actual impairment," Natalie said. "But her score doesn't support capacity issues." I felt my spine go cold. Signed something and not remembered. Think, Maggie. What had they put in front of me? There was that stack of insurance updates Brandon had handed me last month. The afternoon he'd said, "Just sign here, Ma. They're changing some policy wording. No big deal," while a game blared in the background. I'd signed 3 times without reading closely, trusting him the way I'd taught my students not to trust anyone with a clipboard. A few minutes later, the front door closed. Lily patted back toward the kitchen and paused when she saw me standing in the hallway. "See?" she said too brightly. "You did great. Nothing to worry about." "For me," I said. "No, for you? That's another story." Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I replied, "that you can stop telling people I'm falling apart. And if you try to sneak another assessment into my house without my consent, I'll have a very different conversation." with your friend's supervisor." She opened her mouth, closed it, and then went on the attack. "You're being dramatic, Mom. We're just trying to help, and you're paranoid." This is exactly what Dr. Harmon was worried about. I filed that sentence away. Another lie. Another attempt to make me doubt my own reality. A former principal's memory is long. That evening, after everyone went to bed, I pulled out my old file box again. I may not have loved computers, but I loved paper trails. I flipped through the last few months until I found the insurance papers I'd signed. On top was a real policy update. Below it was something else entirely. A document titled Limited Durable Power of Attorney, with neat lines where my name and Brandon's appeared. Under scope, it said, "Authority to manage financial accounts, real property, and sign legal documents on behalf of the principal, effective upon execution." The signature at the bottom looked like mine. The date was from that afternoon with the game on. I sat there in my faded flannel pajamas, the house creaking around me, and read that line over and over. Authority to manage real property. They'd tested my mind that morning, then tried to build a story so that I might sign things and forget. They'd already tucked the weapon in their waistband. Now they were stitching the holster. For a second, my hands shook so badly I almost tore the paper. Then the old voice inside me, the one that had whispered, "Something is wrong," said something new. "They think they're building a case, Maggie. They have no idea you're about to build one, too." I put the document back exactly where I found it and closed the box. If you think that discovery was bad, stay with me. What they did next made that forged power of attorney look like a warm-up act. Once I'd seen that power of attorney, it was like someone had twisted a lens in my brain. Everything snapped into focus. I started paying a different kind of attention. In the mornings, I forgot my knitting in the kitchen so I could sit at the table and work while Lily and Brandon took phone calls in the living room. When they lowered their voices, I listened to the rhythm of their sentences, the way certain words made them tense. "Escrow," Brandon said one afternoon, his voice a little too loud. "We can't move forward if the title's not clear." "Just tell them she's already given you authority," Lily hissed back. "We have the signed papers. That's what they care about. Besides, she needs to be somewhere with more care." "Memory care," he corrected. That's what they called it. Memory care. Like I was some glitchy hard drive to be taken to the repair shop. I opened my knitting bag and pulled out a ball of yarn, using the crinkle of the plastic to cover my sharp intake of breath. That evening, I took a walk. I told Lily I needed some fresh air. She fussed about how late it was. "It's barely 7, I said, pulling on my rain jacket. "I walked this neighborhood long before you were born." She let me go, reluctantly. The second the door closed behind me, I didn't turn toward the park like usual. I turned toward the corner house with the neon green truck in the driveway, the one belonging to my neighbor and unofficial little brother, Sam Parker. Sam is 66, built like someone who used to play college football and never stopped doing yard work. He also happens to be a retired attorney. I'd gone to him with PTA bylaw questions and messy custody cases back when we both still worked. He opened the door in a faded Seahawks sweatshirt. "Mags," he said. "To what do I owe the honor?" "Can you look at something for me?" I asked. I didn't tell him everything right away. Not because I didn't trust him, but because saying the words, "My daughter may be trying to steal my house," out loud felt like dragging something monstrous into daylight. Instead, I slid the power of attorney across his kitchen table. He put on his glasses. "Well, somebody's been busy," he said after a minute. Where'd this come from? Brandon said it was an insurance update, I replied. About a month ago. Sam's jaw tightened. And you signed it without reading? Yes, I said, because there was no point in lying to a man who'd watched me read board policy for fun. It was a stupid, trusting moment. He exhaled through his nose. You're not the first person to do that, Maggie. That's why people like me had jobs for 30 years. He tapped the document with one blunt finger. This gives him a lot of control. Too much, in my opinion, given what you've told me over the years. Can I undo it? I asked. In theory, yes, he said. You can revoke this any time while you're competent. The question is, are they planning to argue you're not? I told him about the cognitive assessment, about the way Lily had talked to the nurse, about the offhand comment I'd overheard, if she signed something and forgot. His expression went from concerned to something colder. Financial elder abuse cases are coming across my former colleagues' desks more and more, he said. Kids, in-laws, helpful neighbors. They start. She managing mail and appointments. Next thing you know, the house is gone, and the parent is sitting in a facility wondering why nothing feels familiar. My stomach lurched. So this is a thing? Oh, it's very much a thing, he said. And the fact that you're bringing this to me now, while you're lucid and angry, is good. It means we're not too late. But you have to be willing to fight them. I spent 30 years making teenagers mad, I said, managing a thin smile. I can handle a couple of adults. He chuckled, then turned serious again. All right, first step, we draft a revocation. You sign it, we notarize it, and we send copies to any place they could be waving this around. Banks, insurance, anyone. Will that stop them from selling the house? I asked. It'll complicate it, he said. But the better question is, have they already started? He pulled out his laptop, his fingers flying faster than men half his age. A few keystrokes later, he nodded. There it is. Address, parcel, owner of record, you. For now, I said. There's also a pending inquiry from a title company, he added, which means someone's at least asked them to start looking at your property. He turned the screen so I could see. The name of the company meant nothing to me, but the date, last week, landed like a stone in my gut. They're moving faster than I thought, he said. We spent the next hour drafting a revocation. He explained each line, making sure I understood. I signed with a hand that shook more from fury than age. Tomorrow morning, he said, we'll get this notarized. I'll drive you so Lily and Brandon don't help with the process. Thank you, I said quietly. I feel like an idiot. He shook his head. You feel like a mother who trusted her kid. There's a difference. And no matter what they've forgotten, I haven't forgotten who you are, Maggie. The woman who stayed up all night with me when my divorce went nuclear. The one who brought casseroles when my brother died. You're not a victim in my book. You're a client who just remembered she has claws. Walking home in the drizzle, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Solid. Not because the problem was fixed, far from it, but because I was finally facing it. The next morning, in a bland office downtown, I stood under harsh fluorescent lights while a notary watched me sign the revocation. Sam mailed copies certified. We sent one to my bank, one to my insurance company, and one to the title office that had made that inquiry. On the drive back, we passed a brick building with a modest sign, Silver Harbor Elder Advocacy Center. What's that? I asked. New nonprofit, Sam said. Mostly volunteers. They help seniors who've been taken advantage of by family or scammers. I've spoken at a couple of their Workshops. I stared at the sign as we rolled by. Elder advocacy. I had never imagined I'd need a place like that. It sounded like something for people who didn't know how to read forms and didn't know how to stand up for themselves. Yet here I was, a retired principal with 3 degrees, having nearly signed my life away because my daughter looked sad in my kitchen. That night, back in my house, Lily popped her head into the living room. "How was your day, Mom?" "Good," I said, keeping my voice light. "Took a little ride with Sam." Her smile stiffened. "Everything okay?" "Fine," I said. "We just did some responsible adult stuff." Her eyes flickered. For the first time, I saw a flash of something like fear under her control. Good, I thought. Let you wonder what I'm doing for a change. But as it turned out, I still didn't know the full scope of their plan. That revelation would arrive in the form of a piece of paper left where they thought I'd never look, and a single line of text that made my blood run cold. Sometimes people hang themselves with their own laziness. In this case, my daughter's downfall came from a printer jam. 3 days after we drafted the revocation, I woke to the sound of whispered swearing in the office room we used to call the den. I shuffled down the hall and found Brandon crouched in front of my old inkjet printer, smacking it like it had insulted his mother. "Stupid thing," he muttered. "Come on, just one more copy." "Have you tried turning it off and on?" I asked from the doorway. He jerked upright, hand flying to his chest. "Geez, Ma, you scared me." "Living people do that sometimes," I said. "What are you printing?" "Just some job stuff," he said quickly. "Forms." Something white fluttered from the side of the printer and slid under the low bookcase. Lily, who had been standing by the window, crossed the room quickly. "I'll get it," she said. I bent faster than she expected. One perk of people assuming you're slow: they underestimate your reflexes. My fingers closed around the corner of the paper first. "Mom, seriously, it's just—" She stopped because she saw my face as I straightened up and read the header. "Purchase and sale agreement," it said. Under property address was my street, my house number. Under seller were someone's names: Brandon Blake and Lily Blake. Not Margaret Cole, not even Marjorie. "I didn't know you two bought a house," I said carefully, my voice almost too calm. Lily swallowed. "Mom, that's just a draft. The realtor said—" "The realtor," I said. "For what exactly? Because this looks like you're selling my house as if it belongs to you." Brandon stepped forward, hands up. "Ma, it's not what you think. This is just pre-work. The lawyer said we can streamline things if you pretend you own what I own," I finished for him. Lily reached for the paper. I held it out of reach. "Give that back," she said, her voice losing its sugar. "No," I said. "I think I'll keep this." Her jaw clenched. "You're overreacting. We're trying to secure things before your memory gets worse. That's why we did the power of attorney. You don't even remember half the things you sign anymore." Funny she should bring that up. "Sit down," I said. "What?" she snapped. "Sit down." I pointed at the couch. 30 years of principal voice still lived in my chest. It came out now like a bell. To my faint satisfaction, they both sat. I remained standing, the contract in my hand, my heart hammering. "When your father and I bought this house," I began slowly, "we could barely scrape together the down payment. We did it anyway because we wanted to give you stability. When you were 7 and you broke your arm falling out of that maple tree, you cried all the way to the hospital because you thought they'd cut the tree down. Do you remember what I told you?" Lily shifted, eyes darting toward the contract. "Mom, what does that—" I told you, I continued, that some things are worth fighting for, and you never abandon something you love just because it gets hard. I dropped the gentle tone. So imagine how it feels to discover that my only child has been sneaking around behind my back, trying to sell the only home I've ever known, and padding in medical notes and whispered conversations to make it sound like I'm too far gone to notice. Neither of them spoke. Assuming I'm too frail to read is one thing, I said. Assuming I'm too stupid to notice when my own name is missing from a sale contract is another. Brandon found his voice first. You're twisting this, Ma. We're not stealing. We're planning. You can't maintain this house forever. You'll fall. You'll forget things. We're just... There are ways to plan with someone, I cut in, and ways to run over them. Papers you hide, assessments you schedule without consent, conversations about once she's in memory care. You chose the second path. Lily's eyes flashed. We're doing what's best for you. You've been leaving the stove on. You forgot your coat last week. You washed the same load of laundry 3 times. I turned the stove back off, I said. I realized I wasn't cold, and I re-washed the laundry because you left it in the machine for 2 days. Inconveniences are not incompetence, Lily. This is exactly what abusers say, she snapped. Deny, deny, deny. Dr. Harmon is worried. I pulled my phone from my pocket, thumb on the record icon. Let's talk about denial, I said. You denied a minute ago that this contract meant anything, and yet here it is, with your signature and Brandon's. No mention of me, no trustee, no life estate, just you selling something you do not own. That is fraud. And the power of attorney you slipped under an insurance document? Sam and I revoked it, yesterday, with a notary. Brandon blanched. You... what? Oh, did I forget to mention? I said coolly. I may repeat stories sometimes, but I do not forget legal documents. Lily's hand flew to her mouth. For the first time since this started, she looked less angry than scared. You went to a lawyer? She whispered. I went to a friend, I corrected, who also happens to be a lawyer. We've notified my bank, the title company, and everyone. Your little shortcut is now a piece of useless paper, like this. I held up the contract. We were going to take care of you, Lily said, tears suddenly spilling over. We were going to upgrade your room in the facility. We were going to make sure you never worried about bills again. And we were finally going to buy a place of our own. Do you know what it's like being almost 40 and still not owning anything? Yes, I said softly. I know exactly what that's like. Because I was 38 before we stopped renting, and your father and I did it the hard way, with extra jobs and no fancy phones, and saying no to things we wanted. We did not do it by cutting our parents out of their own lives. There was a long, brittle silence. Brandon stood abruptly. This is going nowhere. I'm not going to sit here and be called a thief. If it walks like theft and signs like theft, I said, the shoe fits. He glared at me. We're just trying to be proactive. Care facilities aren't cheap. Did you pick one out already? I asked. He faltered. Lily looked away. That's when I knew the contract and the power of attorney were just the tip of the iceberg. There were probably emails, applications, conversations I hadn't heard, maybe even deposit checks. I folded the contract and slid it into my cardigan pocket. You will not bring anyone else into my house for assessments or planning without my consent, I said. You will not sign a single piece of paper with my address on it. And if you so much as open my file box without me in the room, I will call the police, and I will have Sam on the phone before you can say elder abuse. Do you understand me? Brandon muttered something under his breath. Lily stared at the floor. Do you understand? I repeated. Yes, Lily said finally, voice small. Yes, Ma, Brandon echoed. I turned and walked down the hall, my legs shaking. In my bedroom, I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling like all the air had gone out of my lungs. I'd stood up for myself. I'd revoked their weapon. I'd caught the contract. So why did I still feel like I was 3 steps behind? The answer came 2 nights later, when I made the mistake of taking the laundry basket into the garage and noticed a trash bag sitting beside the bin, half open, with a shredded envelope on top. The return address was a senior living facility 1 town over. The subject line before the tear read, "Congratulations on your approved application. If you thought selling the house behind my back was the worst part, you haven't heard how close they came to shipping me off before I turned everything around. Stay with me, because this is where the real planning begins." I fished the shredded envelope out of the trash like a raccoon and carried it into the kitchen, bits of paper crinkling in my hands. I laid the largest pieces flat on the table. Congratulations on your approved application for residency at Cedar Crest Memory and Wellness. Cedar Crest. I'd heard of it. Fancy facility, big windows, piano in the lobby. I'd also heard the gossip, steep entrance fee, long wait list, and families who sometimes placed relatives there more for convenience than need. On one of the smaller strips, I could see faint type. Primary contact. Lily Blake. My breath came out in a thin hiss. So that was the endgame. Get me declared a safety risk. Ship me to Cedar Crest. Sell the house under their names. And use my pension to supplement their new life. All while telling themselves they were taking care of me. I thought about stomping into the living room and throwing the paper strips at them like confetti, demanding answers. Instead, I did something that would have surprised my younger self. I walked to the pantry, grabbed a zip-top bag, and slid the papers inside. Evidence, not emotion. Later that night, when the house was quiet and the dishwasher hummed, I called Sam from my bedroom. They applied to a memory care facility, I said, without telling me. He was silent for a moment. You're sure? I have the letter they tried to shred, I said. They're approved. Send me a picture, he said. I did. A few seconds later, he whistled low. Cedar Crest doesn't approve people without a pretty thick file. That means someone has been feeding them reports. Probably about your forgetfulness. My stomach twisted. Can they force me to go? Not without a court order or some kind of guardianship, he said. But if they keep building this narrative that you're confused, if they get a couple of doctors to sign off, a judge who doesn't look closely might be persuaded. I used to be that judge in school discipline cases, I muttered, the one deciding whose story seemed more put together. And that's exactly why you're going to beat them, he said, because you know how stories can be spun. He paused. Maggie, this is where we stop reacting and start planning. You're not just revoking things. You're building your own record. You're creating a trail of your capacity, your wishes, and their behavior. What does that look like? I asked. First, we document everything, he said. Every time they question your memory, every time they forget to show you mail, every little shove towards safety. Record conversations. Washington's a one-party consent state. You're allowed to. Record them, I repeated, suddenly grateful for the small microphone icon on my phone. Second, he continued, we get you in front of doctors you trust. Not just your primary. Maybe a neurologist, maybe a psychologist. You tell them exactly why you're there. You have them assess you. If they write no sign of dementia in their notes, that's gold. Courts listen to that. Third? I asked. Third, we lock the house down in a way they cannot touch, he said. Have you ever considered a living trust? No, I said slowly. I always thought that was for rich people. It's for people with something they want to protect, he said. You put the house into a trust with you as trustee. That way, even if someone waives an old power of attorney, they can't sell what you, as trustee, haven't authorized, especially when you've already revoked their authority. I thought of my kitchen table, of the generations of homework and bills and birthday cards that had passed across it. The idea of putting the house into a trust felt strange, like acknowledging I was closer to the end of my life than the middle. But then I pictured Cedar Crest's shiny lobby. I pictured Lily and Brandon standing in that lobby, signing me over like a piece of luggage. What about my will? I asked. Right now, the house goes to Lily. Does it have to? He asked gently. I stared at the wall. No, I said at last. It doesn't. We spent an hour mapping things out. The next week would be a flurry of appointments. We'd be careful not to tell Lily and Brandon specifics. I'd keep acting like their slightly frazzled mom who needed help, all while laying down legal landmines wherever they walked. The next morning, I scheduled a checkup with Dr. Harmon. It's been a few months, I told his receptionist, and my daughter is suddenly very worried about my memory. I'd like you to note exactly what you see, in writing. Of course, Maggie, the receptionist said. At the appointment, I told him everything, the assessment, the power of attorney, and the Cedar Crest letter. His jaw hardened in that way doctors get when something bumps up against their oath. Maggie, you're one of my healthiest patients, he said, physically and mentally. Yes, you're slower. You're 70. But you're oriented, you're managing your own meds, and you're damn sure making your own decisions. Would you be willing to write that? I asked. Formally. I'll do you better, he said. I'm adding a note to your chart today and printing a copy. If anyone calls asking about your decline, I'll refer them to that. I left with a letter in my purse that said, in crisp medical language, that I was fully capable of managing my own affairs. 2 days later, I sat in a neurologist's waiting room, flipping through a magazine. The tests he ran were longer than the home assessment, but the conclusion was the same. No dementia, no cognitive impairment beyond age-appropriate slowing. Can I have that in writing? I asked. He looked amused. You're not the first person to ask, yes. While I was busy collecting proof that I was still myself, Sam introduced me to a woman named Andrea at the Silver Harbor Elder Advocacy Center. She wore sensible shoes and had the kind of direct gaze that made people tell the truth. We see this every week, she said, after I'd told her my story. Kids who use "we're just trying to help" as a mask for "we're just trying to control." I'm glad you came before they actually moved you. I always thought this happened to other people, I said. People who weren't paying attention. You'd be surprised, she said. Judges, teachers, nurses, we've had them all. The common thread isn't intelligence. It's love. You loved your daughter. You trusted her. They used that. That's on them, not you. She helped me set up a file in their system. We uploaded scans of my doctor's letters, my revocation, the shredded Cedar Crest approval, and the contract I'd confiscated. We made a list of incidents with dates. If this ever ends up in court, this timeline will matter, she said. This, I echoed softly. You think it will? Well, she said, that depends on how they react when they find out the money they're counting on isn't coming. Because while I was seeing doctors and advocates, Sam had been pulling strings. 2 days later, we sat in the office of a trust attorney named Nora, who looked like she'd stepped out of a "Don't Mess With Me" advertisement. We placed the house into a revocable living trust with me as sole trustee. We updated my will. If Lily continued down this path, she would inherit nothing of the house she'd tried to steal. I designated a portion to a scholarship fund for first-generation college students, another portion to the Elder Advocacy Center. The rest went to a cousin in Idaho who sent me hand-knitted socks every Christmas and never once asked for money. "Are you sure?" Nora asked, pen poised over the last page. I thought of my hallway, where Lily's childhood drawings still hung, the crooked sun and the wobbly letters spelling "I love Mommy." I also thought of Cedar Crest's shredded approval letter. "I'm sure," I said. When I got home that afternoon, Lily was in the kitchen, scrolling on her phone. "You've been out a lot lately," she said lightly. "Should we be worried?" I smiled. "Just enjoying my independence while I still have it." She laughed, but there was a tremor in it. "By the way," I added, "if anyone from Cedar Crest calls, you can tell them I'm not interested." Her hand froze on the screen. "How do you know about—" "Oh, honey," I said, "you're good at shredding mail, but you're not that good." She stared at me, mouth opening and closing. "I'm not going anywhere I don't choose to go," I said quietly. "And if you push, I will push back harder." That night, I slid my phone under my pillow and lay awake, listening to the murmur of their voices through the vent. This time I recorded the whole conversation. "Everything was supposed to be settled by October," Brandon hissed. "She's being manipulated," Lily whispered back. "Sam's filling her head with horror stories. Once she's in Cedar Crest, she'll calm down, and we can—" The recording picked up the next words clearly. "By then the house will be sold. She'll have no reason to fight." I stopped the recording with a numb thumb. The next time they tried to use my age against me, it wouldn't just be my word against theirs. It would be their own words, playing in a courtroom. All that was left was timing. They thought October would be their finish line. I decided it would be their trial date. October in Silver Harbor is a moody month. The water turns steel gray, the wind picks up, and the neighbors start covering their gardens against the first frost. On the morning my daughter thought she was going to place me at Cedar Crest, the sky was low and heavy, threatening rain. It felt fitting. "Mom?" Lily called up the stairs. "Are you up? We need to leave by 9 to get to your appointment." "Appointment?" I called back, feigning confusion. "The tour," she said, appearing in my doorway. "At the wellness center, remember? We talked about it." "You mean Cedar Crest," I said. She flinched. "It's not a big deal, just a look. You can ask questions. Nothing is being decided today." That was a lie. I'd seen enough of their paperwork to know there were intake forms and conditional agreements waiting for my signature. Forms they probably thought I'd sign without reading, like the last time. "All right," I said mildly. "Let me get dressed." I closed the door and took a long breath. On the bed lay my navy blue blazer and my good slacks, the clothes I used to wear on the first day of school, when I needed to project authority and calm at the same time. I put them on slowly, watching my reflection in the mirror. I did not look like a frail woman on the brink of forgetting her own name. I looked like a principal about to expel a couple of students who thought the rules didn't apply to them. Downstairs, I picked up my purse. Inside, neatly organized, were copies of my doctor's letters, the revocation of power of attorney, the trust documents, the the recording of their late-night conversation, and a small flash drive with backups of everything. There was also a business card for Andrea from the Elder Advocacy Center, and one for a detective from the Silver Harbor Police Department, whom I'd met quietly a week earlier. "Ready?" Brandon asked, coming in from the driveway. He wore a pressed shirt and a forced smile. "As I'll ever be," I said. The drive to Cedar Crest took 20 minutes. Lily babbled nervously about how nice it was, how there were gardens and activities and on-site nurses. "It sounds like a cruise ship," I said, "minus the ocean." At the facility, a woman in a peach blazer met us in the lobby. "Welcome, Mrs. Cole," she said. "I'm Dana, the admissions coordinator. We're so glad you came." "I'm here to learn," I said, "not to move in." "Of course," she said smoothly. "We always start with a tour. Then we can sit down with some paperwork, just to have options ready in case you decide later." Paperwork. We walked through wide halls that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something heavier underneath, the scent of too many bodies in one place. There were cheerful paintings on the walls, and in one common room, a circle of residents was doing chair exercises to oldies music. Some of them looked content. Some looked lost. One woman stared out the window, expression distant, hands twisting a tissue to shreds. A staff member patted her shoulder, smiling too brightly. "Looks lovely," I said. After the tour, they ushered us into a small conference room, a pitcher of water, 4 glasses, and a stack of folders. "We can start with a basic intake," Dana said, sliding a form toward me. "Just to get a sense of your needs." I glanced at the top page. Name, date of birth, fine. The second page, consent to release information. The third, financial responsibility and authorization. Under that header, in small but legible print, "I hereby authorize my designated representative to manage all financial transactions related to my care, including but not limited to the sale of real property and access to personal accounts, as needed for payment." There was a blank line for designated representative. It had already been filled in. Lily Blake. "Interesting," I said. Lily shifted. "They just pre-filled it so we don't have to waste time." "Did they also pre-sign my name?" I asked. The line for resident signature was blessedly blank. "Mom, can we not make this harder than it has to be?" Lily said tightly. "Dana has other families, waiting." "Then we shouldn't waste her time," I said. I picked up the pen, but instead of signing, I drew a neat line through the financial responsibility page and wrote in capital letters, "Not consented. See attached." Then I reached into my purse and pulled out a slim folder, sliding it onto the table. "What's this?" Dana asked, looking between us. "This," I said, "is why this conversation is going to take a different turn." I started with the letters from my doctors. Dr. Harmon's statement that I was fully capable of managing my own affairs. The neurologist's report confirms no dementia. "Any intake you complete needs to reflect this reality," I said. "If you accept me under false pretenses, it won't just be an ethical issue. It will be a legal one." Dana's face changed as she read. The salesman's sheen slipped a little. "Mrs. Cole, we don't force anyone to stay here. Our only concern is safety." "I appreciate that," I said. "My concern is that my family has been painting a picture of me that isn't accurate. To you, to my doctor, to whoever they need to convince to access my assets." I slid another document across, the revocation of power of attorney. "This was executed and notarized weeks ago," I said. "Any authority they claim to have to manage my property has been revoked. If they brought you anything different, it's outdated." Brandon made a strangled noise. Ma, you're embarrassing yourself. You're clearly confused. Am I? I said quietly. I took my phone out, opened the voice recorder app, and tapped play. The conference room filled with the sound of their own voices from our house. Once she's in Cedar Crest, she'll calm down and we can... By then, the house will be sold. She'll have no reason to fight. Dana's eyes widened. She looked at Lily and Brandon, then at me. Mrs. Cole, she said carefully, when was this recorded? A week and a half ago, I said. In my home, without their knowledge. I was told Washington allows that. It does, Andrea's voice said from the doorway. We all turned. There she stood, in her sensible shoes and calm blouse, with a man in a suit beside her. Detectives don't dress like TV cops. They dress in muted colors that blend into hallways. This one had a badge at his belt. Sorry, we're a few minutes late, Andrea said. Traffic on the bridge was worse than expected. Who are they? Lily demanded, looking between us. I asked them to join us if you insisted on this appointment, I said. This is Andrea from the Elder Advocacy Center, and this is Detective Mills, Silver Harbor Police. They're very interested in financial abuse cases. Brandon's face went chalky. Detective Mills nodded toward the table. I understand there's some question about consent and attempted sale of property, he said. Mr. and Mrs. Blake, I'd like to ask you some questions about documents you've had Mrs. Cole sign and about a purchase and sale agreement listing you as sellers for a house you do not own. This is ridiculous, Brandon said. She's being manipulated by these people. She's declining. She doesn't know what she's doing. Funny, I said, because these doctors seem to think I do. I pushed the medical letters toward the detective. He scanned them quickly, professional eyes taking in the bold phrases. No signs of cognitive impairment, he read aloud. Capable of managing her own financial affairs. Does that sound like someone who should be placed in a memory care unit against her will? Andrea asked mildly. Dana cleared her throat. I need to step out and consult with our director, she said, gathering the unsigned forms. Cedar Crest does not admit residents who are unwilling and clearly competent to refuse. We'll also need to review how this referral was presented. She left the room with the folder. For the first time, Lily looked less angry than lost. Mom, why are you doing this? She whispered. We're trying to help you. We're drowning. The house is mine, I said. And even if I decided to sell it, it wouldn't be to bail out your bad decisions. You had options, Lily. You could have come to me honestly. We could have talked about downsizing or co-owning or anything. But you chose lies. You chose to build a case to erase me. Tears filled her eyes. We just wanted a fresh start. You don't build a fresh start on someone else's grave, I said. I taught you that. You just didn't want to hear it when it applied to you. Detective Mills opened a thin folder of his own. Mr. Blake, Mrs. Blake, he said evenly. This is the point where I advise you that you are not under arrest. But you are the subjects of an ongoing investigation. Any questions I ask today, you may answer or decline. But lying would not be in your best interests. Investigation? Brandon repeated. For what? For potential financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, forgery and attempted fraud, Mills said. We have copies of a power of attorney document that Mrs. Cole states she did not understand, a partially filled purchase and sale agreement, and now this recording. You can't be serious, Lily whispered. Oh, I'm very serious, Mills replied, and so is the prosecutor's office. I sat back, my heart pounding, my fingers cold. Part of me wanted to stand up and leave, Let the professionals handle it. Another part of me, the part that had watched hundreds of kids finally face consequences for bullying or theft, wanted to watch every step. "I think we're done here," Andrea said gently, touching my hand. "Cedar, Crest won't be admitting you. You can decide whether you want to press formal charges. You don't have to decide that today." But I already knew the answer. I had pressed charges on students for vandalism smaller than this. If I let this slide just because the defendants shared my last name, what did that say about every principle I'd ever held? I stood, smoothing my blazer. "I'd like to go home," I said. My home. The one I almost lost because I loved my daughter enough to let her back in. On the drive back, Andrea rode with me in a separate car. "That was intense," she said. "I've broken up worse fights in cafeterias," I replied, though my hands were trembling. "You did well," she said. "You stayed clear. You let the evidence speak." "Do you think they'll actually charge them?" I asked. "That'll be up to the DA," she said. "But with what you've documented, they'd be foolish not to." I looked out at the gray water as we crossed the bridge, the town coming into view. My town. My house. For the first time in months, I let myself imagine it without their voices echoing down the hall, without their hands on my mail, without their plans inscribed over my life. If you've ever had to take a stand against people you love, you know that the moment you finally do it is both terrifying and weirdly calm. You know the explosion is coming. You know nothing will be the same, and you do it anyway. That's where I was, between Cedar Crest and my driveway, knowing that this wasn't the end. It was the opening statement. If you think confronting them at the facility was the end of this story, you're wrong. The real consequences, and the choice I had to make about my own child, were still ahead. Stay with me, because what came next was justice, but it wasn't simple. The official wheels turned slower than my anger. Detective Mills interviewed me twice more at the station, each time with Andrea or Sam by my side. He asked careful, detailed questions. When I'd signed the power of attorney, how it was presented, and what Lily and Brandon had said before and after. He took copies of everything: the revocation, the trust documents, the shredded Cedar Crest letter, and the recording. "The DA will review this," he said after the second interview. "Given your doctor's letters and the timeline, I think they're going to take it seriously." "Do you ever feel like you're betraying your own family when you do this?" I asked him quietly. He looked at me for a long moment. "I've arrested sons for hurting their mothers," he said. "Brothers for hurting sisters. Betrayal happened long before I showed up. You're not creating consequences. You're responding to them." A few weeks later, I got a call. "Mrs. Cole," the prosecutor's assistant said, "this is Lisa from the county attorney's office. We're moving forward with charges against Lily and Brandon Blake." My hand tightened on the phone. "What charges?" "Attempted theft, attempted fraudulent conveyance of real property, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult," she said. "We'll want you in court to give a victim impact statement if you're willing." "Vulnerable adult," I repeated, the phrase tasting odd. "I don't feel vulnerable." "Vulnerability isn't a character flaw," she said gently. "It's a legal category. It just means someone targeted you because of your age and situation. It means the law takes it more seriously." "Then yes," I said. "I'll be there." Lily tried to come home once. It was a rainy Sunday. I was in the kitchen making soup when I heard the front door open and close. She stepped in, hair damp, eyes rimmed red. "Mom," she said. I didn't invite her to sit. I kept my hands on the cutting board, slicing carrots. How did you get in? I asked. She held up her old key. You never changed the locks. That was an oversight, I said. One I'll fix tomorrow. She flinched. Please don't do this, she whispered. Please don't press charges. Brandon says they could put us in jail. I could lose my job. We'll never recover from this. You almost took my whole life, I said quietly. You almost moved me out of my home, cut me off from my bank accounts, and sold everything your father and I worked for. What exactly did you think I would do when I found out? Bake you a forgiveness cake? Tears spilled over. We were desperate, Mom. Brandon's business collapsed. We were drowning in debt. You have so much. You'd barely miss it. I have so much because I said no to 1,000 things I wanted, I said. Because your father worked double shifts. Because we patched this roof ourselves instead of taking vacations. Because we acted like adults when things got hard, not like children grabbing from the cookie jar. I was scared, she said. I saw you slowing down. I remembered Grandma forgetting who we were. I didn't want that for you. I didn't want to watch you fall apart. So you decided to preemptively erase me? I said. To write my story for me. To stick me in a pretty building and tell yourselves you were merciful while you spent the profit. She sobbed. You don't understand what it's like being me, always the kid of the saintly principal. Everyone expects me to be like you. I just wanted something that was mine. Something that was mine. The house creaked softly, as if listening. You could have built something that was yours, I said. You still could. But you tried to carve it out of me. That's the line, Lily. That's the part I can't step back from. She wiped at her face. So that's it? You're just going to let them label me an abuser? You labeled yourself when you signed those papers, I said. The law is just catching up. She stepped closer. What if I testify against Brandon? She whispered. What if I say it was all his idea, that he pressured me, that he... I shook my head. I listened to that recording, Lily. I heard both your voices. You weren't some innocent bystander. You were enthusiastic. You can't undo that by shifting blame. That's not fair, she snapped. You're supposed to love me unconditionally. I do love you, I said. But love and trust are not the same thing. Trust is earned. You spent months burning it down. I can love you and still refuse to lie to the court, to save you from consequences you created. She stared at me like she didn't recognize me. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she'd only ever seen the mother who bailed her out of late assignments and smoothed over conflicts. Not the principal who could suspend kids with a kind word and a firm hand. How can you do this? She whispered. How could you? I asked back. She didn't answer. She stormed out, the door slamming so hard the windows rattled. The next day, I had a locksmith change every lock in the house. I gave a spare key to Sam. I gave another to the Elder Advocacy Center to put in my sealed file just in case. The court process took months. There were hearings and continuances and plea offers. In the end, the prosecutor recommended a deal. Brandon has priors for financial misconduct, she told me in a conference room. He's looking at possible jail time. Lily has no record. If they both plead to reduced charges, we can push for probation, fines, and mandatory counseling. Otherwise, we risk a trial where a sympathetic jury might buy their "we were just trying to help" story. It's your call whether we accept. Will the record say what they did? I asked. Or will it hide it under legalese? It'll say, attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, she said. That's plain enough. I thought about the years ahead of me, about the years ahead of Lily. I don't need them in prison, I said. I need there to be a record, so the next person they try this on has a warning, and I need them nowhere near my finances ever again. We can ask for a no-contact order for any financial dealings, she said, and we can make restitution part of it. Restitution? I asked. What would they pay back? They didn't succeed. No, she said. But you incurred legal fees. You took time off for appointments. You paid for locks, for doctors. Those are real costs. In the end, they both pled. Brandon took the harsher deal. A felony on his record, community service, fines, and a suspended sentence hanging over his head if he so much as breathed on someone's checkbook without permission. Lily pled to a misdemeanor version, with probation, counseling, and a formal apology as conditions. The judge, a woman I'd once mentored as a scared ninth grader, looked them both in the eye and said, "You took advantage of someone you were supposed to protect. This court takes that seriously." Then it was time for my statement. I stood, knees wobbling, and looked at my daughter, who wouldn't meet my eyes. I spent my career trying to teach kids the difference between a mistake and a choice, I said. A mistake is forgetting an assignment. A mistake is saying something you wish you could unsay. What you did was not a mistake. It was a series of choices. You chose secrecy. You chose to twist my words. You chose to present me as incompetent because it made your plan easier. I swallowed hard. I am not here today because I want revenge, I continued. I am here because I believe other people in my position, older, trusting of their children, deserve to see that the law is on their side when that trust is abused. And I am here because I want my daughter to know that I will not lie for her. I love her, but I will not shield her from the truth of what she's done. My voice shook on the last sentence. The judge nodded. Thank you, Mrs. Cole. When it was over, when the gavel came down and their conditions were read into the record, something in my chest unclenched. Outside the courthouse, Sam squeezed my shoulder. You did it, he said. I don't feel triumphant, I said. I just feel sad. That's normal, Andrea said. Justice isn't always satisfying. Sometimes it just means you watched someone you love put their hand on a hot stove and refused to pretend it didn't burn. In the months that followed, life slowly rearranged itself around the absence of Lily and Brandon's footsteps in my hallway. They moved to a rental across town, then to another town entirely when jobs dried up. She sent one letter, scrawled and tear-stained, apologizing and insisting she didn't know how to stop once it started. I wrote back once, simply, I hope you learn. For your sake. My door is not open right now. My heart might be someday, but it will never be attached to my bank accounts again. I never heard back. The house felt both emptier and safer. On quiet afternoons, I would sit on the back deck, listening to the gulls and the distant ferry horns, and try to make sense of holding two things at once: love for my child and relief that she was no longer under my roof. One day, as I was deadheading roses again, my neighbor Joyce called across the fence. You look lighter, she said. What changed? I finally stopped treating myself like the supporting character in my own life, I said. She laughed, not understanding half of it. But I did. The Elder Advocacy Center asked me to speak at a workshop 6 months after the court case ended. We'd love it if you told your story, Andrea said. You can keep details vague if you want, but hearing from someone who caught it in time could save others. Will there be snacks? I asked, because some parts of being a school administrator never die. She grinned. We can arrange cookies. That's how I found myself standing at a podium in a church basement one Thursday evening, looking out at a crowd of gray heads and a few younger faces, sons, daughters, caregivers. I told them everything. The little comments, the helpful mail sorting, the surprise cognitive assessment, the forged power of attorney, the contract, Cedar Crest, the recordings, the revocation, the trust. I watched their faces change as they recognized pieces of their own lives. At every step, I said, I had a choice. I could tell myself I was being paranoid. I could let myself be guilted as ungrateful or selfish or unloving. Or I could believe what the evidence in front of me was saying, that the people I loved were making choices that put me in danger. I took a breath. I chose to believe the evidence, I said, even when it broke my heart. Afterward, a tall woman with a cane came up, tears in her eyes. My son has been helping with my bills, she said. I thought I was crazy for feeling weird about it. I'm going to call the center tomorrow. Good, I said. You're not crazy. You're observant. On the ride home, the air smelled like rain and fir trees. Andrea drove, humming under her breath. You're good at this, she said. You ever think about volunteering more? I've spent enough years herding teenagers, I said. I suppose I can herd a few more seniors into safety. We both laughed. Over the next year, those volunteer hours became something bigger. I started sitting in on intake interviews, offering to read letters out loud for people whose eyes weren't so sharp. I went to court with 2 different women whose nephews had cleaned out their accounts. I was there the first time a judge cited my case as precedent for taking red flags seriously. At home, my house changed too. The trust Nora set up for me specified what would happen to the house when I was gone. A chunk would go to the scholarship fund, as planned. Another chunk, per a late-night inspiration, would fund a yearly safe harbor retreat for burned-out teachers. A week at my house after I'm gone, free of charge, just to breathe. The rest, I decided, would go to the Elder Advocacy Center. Let my old wood floors and creaky stairs turn into legal aid and support groups. I also stopped living in it like a museum. I took in a roommate, a young first-year teacher named Callie, who needed cheap rent and quiet nights to grade papers. We drew up a lease. She paid her share, fixed my Wi-Fi, and laughed at my stories. Friends' parents would never do this, she said one evening over dinner. They just complain about being lonely but won't change anything. I spent a year watching what happens when you let fear make your decisions, I said. I'm not doing that anymore. There are days when I miss Lily so much it hurts. When I hear a song she liked as a teenager and have to sit down for a minute. When I pass a mother and daughter arguing over produce in the grocery store and feel tears prickling. When I catch myself picturing an alternate timeline where she came to me honestly, where we sat at that table and planned together instead of being at each other's throats. In those moments, I remind myself of something Sam said early on. You can't control whether she grows from this. You can only control whether you do. So I grow. I bake bread for my neighbors. I keep learning about trusts and guardianships so I can explain them in plain language to people who need it. I plant bulbs in the garden, knowing I may not see them all bloom, but someone will. As for Lily, from what I hear through the grapevine, she's in another state now. Working at a small marketing firm, attending mandatory counseling, and paying off fines a little at a time. The no-contact order keeps us apart in any financial sense. We could technically speak as mother and daughter. She hasn't reached out. One day, she might. If she does, I'll listen. I might even meet her for coffee, but I will never again let her near my paperwork. Love can be renewed. Trust, once shattered like that, regrows slowly, if at all. I tell you this not because I want you to hate her. I don't. I tell you this because somewhere, someone listening right now is seeing the same patterns in their own life. The helpful hands that feel more like a grip. The concerned comments that sound like rehearsed lines. If that's you, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not selfish for protecting yourself. You are not cruel for saying no to people who expect unquestioned access to everything you've built. You are allowed to demand transparency. You are allowed to ask for help from professionals. You are allowed to say, I love you, but I will not let you treat me like a prize to be claimed. I used to think stories like mine were about revenge. They're not. They're about refusing to hand your ending to someone who hasn't earned it. If you've listened all the way to the end, thank you. It means a lot, especially from someone who has been underestimated in the most painful ways. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more people find these stories, people who might not even realize yet that they need to hear them. And finally, tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Would you have pressed charges against your own child or chosen another path? I'll be reading. And somewhere in Silver Harbor, an old woman in a blue house will be rooting for you to choose yourself, too.